I'm Clara, 29, sitting at my kitchen table in Portland, clutching a letter from my dad's estate. It's been 6 months since he passed, and his words about his legacy, a modest house and savings, still echo. I thought I knew grief, but nothing prepared me for this. My mom, Patricia, the one who swore to protect me as a kid, is fighting me for what Dad left. How do you trust family when greed creeps in? Have you ever questioned someone you love? Share where you're watching from below, and if this resonates, please like and subscribe. The week after that letter arrived, I was still reeling, trying to make sense of Mom's intentions. I'm Clara, 29, and my small apartment in Portland felt emptier than ever. My phone buzzed on the counter, Mom's name flashing. Her voice was syrupy, not her usual clipped tone. She wanted me to come to her house for a family meeting to talk about Dad's wishes. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. We hadn't been close since the divorce, but I'd hoped his passing might soften things. Maybe this was her reaching out. I said yes, my voice catching, and hung up, staring at the rain streaking my window. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my keys and headed to the garage where Dad's old workshop sat untouched. The air smelled of sawdust and oil, his presence lingering in every corner. His tools hung neatly on the pegboard, each one tied to a memory. He'd spent years as a carpenter, saving every penny for that house and the nest egg he left me. I ran my fingers over a worn hammer, picturing him teaching me to drive nails straight when I was 10. He'd always said the inheritance was his way of giving me a start, a chance to build something solid. I believed him. I still did. But Mom's call gnawed at me. Why now? Why this sudden need to talk? I pushed the thought down, telling myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe she meant well, that we could find some common ground. I locked the garage and went back inside, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. I dialed Nathan, my older brother who'd moved to Seattle a couple years back. We hadn't talked much since Dad's funeral, but I needed to know if he was in on this meeting. He picked up on the third ring, his voice distracted, like he was half watching TV. Clara, what's up? I cut to the chase, asking about Mom's call. He paused too long, then said, Just go, Clara. It's family. His tone was flat, like he was reading from a script. I pressed him, asking if he knew what Mom wanted, but he mumbled something about work and hung up. I stared at the phone, my stomach twisting. Nathan had always been the practical one, the one who stayed out of drama. If he was dodging me, something wasn't right. I sank onto my couch, pulling a throw blanket over my knees. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I tried to picture the meeting, imagining Mom, Nathan, and me sitting around her dining table, sorting through Dad's wishes like a normal family. But the image wouldn't stick. Instead, I kept seeing Mom's face at the funeral, her eyes dry while I sobbed. She'd hugged me then, but it felt perfunctory, like she was checking a box. I shook my head, trying to focus. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe she just wanted to talk to heal old wounds. I got up and rummaged through a drawer, pulling out a shoebox of old photos. I hadn't looked at them in years, but I needed something to ground me. I sifted through faded snapshots until I found one from a county fair when I was 8. Nathan and I were grinning, cotton candy smeared on our faces, while Mom stood behind us, her arms crossed. Her smile was tight, like she was posing for a stranger's camera. I'd never noticed that before. I set the photo down, my chest heavy. The next morning, I woke up with a headache, the kind that sits behind your eyes and makes everything feel sharp. I made coffee and sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring at the photo again. I wanted to call Mom back to ask her straight what she was planning, but I didn't. Instead, I texted Nathan, asking if he was coming to the meeting. No reply. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness matching my mood. I told myself I'd go to Mom's, hear her out. I owed her that much, didn't I? But as I got ready, pulling on a sweater and jeans, doubt crept in. Mom had never been one for family meetings. After the divorce, she'd moved across town, started a new life with new friends. She'd call on birthdays, send cards, but it was always surface level. Why was she so insistent now? I grabbed my purse and headed out, the rain still falling in a steady drizzle. As I drove to her house, I kept replaying her voice, that forced sweetness. I wanted to believe it was genuine, but deep down, I knew better. Mom's house was a 20-minute drive, but it felt longer, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the windshield. I pulled into her driveway, the neat suburban home looming larger than I remembered. The flower beds were pristine, the shutters freshly painted, everything too perfect, like a magazine spread. I parked, my hands gripping the steering wheel a moment longer than necessary. I told myself to stay open, to give her a chance. But my pulse was already racing, a warning I couldn't shake. I stepped out the gravel, crunching under my boots, and walked to the front door. Before I could knock, Mom swung it open, her smile wide but strained, like she'd been practicing in a mirror. She was dressed in a crisp blazer and slacks, her hair pulled back tightly, not a strand out of place. It wasn't her usual yoga pants and cardigan. "Clara, you made it," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted too long. Her perfume was sharp, floral, and unfamiliar. "This is for the best," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. The words landed like a stone in my chest. I followed her inside, expecting the familiar clutter of her living room, maybe a tray of cookies on the coffee table. Instead, the space was stark, the furniture arranged like a stage set. Two strangers sat at the dining table, both in suits, their briefcases open. One was a man, mid-50s, with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The other was a woman younger, her posture rigid, her fingers tapping nervously on a folder. Mom introduced them as Harold and Sheila, lawyers, here to help with Dad's estate. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a family meeting. This was something else. I sat across from them, my damp sweater clinging to my shoulders. "Where's Nathan?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Mom waved a hand, dismissive. "He's tied up with work, but we'll fill him in." Her casualness stung. Nathan had promised to be here, and now I was alone facing this ambush. I glanced at the lawyers, waiting for someone to explain, but Harold just leaned forward, his tie a garish red against his white shirt. "We're here to discuss adjustments to your father's estate," he said, his tone smooth, like he was selling me a car. "There are some issues with the will." "Issues," I repeated, my throat tightening. Dad's will was clear. He'd told me himself, sitting in his hospital bed, his voice weak but firm. The house, the savings, they were mine, a foundation for my future. Harold exchanged a glance with Mom, a quick flicker that made my skin prickle. He started talking about legal terms, probate, contested assets, words that blurred together. I interrupted, asking for specifics, but he brushed me off, saying it was technical, nothing to worry about. Sheila stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the table, her discomfort palpable. Mom reached for my hand, her fingers cold. "Clara, we just want what's fair," she said, her voice soft but calculated. I pulled back my chair, scraping against the hardwood. Fair. Dad's wishes were fair. I looked at her, searching for the woman who'd tucked me in as a kid, who'd sung off-key lullabies. But her eyes were hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. I noticed a new necklace glinting at her throat, a chunky gold chain that looked expensive, out of place with the frugal Mom I knew. Where did that come from, I wanted to ask, but the words stuck. Harold slid a stack of papers toward me, his smile widening. "We'll need your cooperation to move forward," he said. I didn't touch them. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, hoping it was Nathan. No reply, just a spam email. I texted him again, my fingers fumbling. "Where are you? This is bad." I hit send, my heart pounding. Mom was watching me, her expression unreadable. Sheila shifted in her seat, her pen clattering to the floor, breaking the silence. "Sorry," she mumbled, bending to pick it up. Harold shot her a look, and I caught it, the power dynamic clear. I stood, my legs shaky. "I need time to think," I said, my voice barely steady. Mom's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, honey, take all the time you need." But her tone was patronizing, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Harold gathered his papers, his confidence unshaken. "We'll be in touch," he said, as if the matter was already settled. Sheila avoided my gaze, her hands clasped tightly. I walked to the door, Mom trailing behind, her hand brushing my shoulder. I flinched, not wanting her touch. Outside, the rain had stopped, the air heavy with the scent of wet grass. I got in my car, my hands trembling as I started the engine. I glanced back at the house, Mom standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the light. She looked smaller, but not softer. I drove off, my mind racing. Nathan's silence, Mom's new jewelry, the lawyer's slick assurances, it all pointed to something I didn't want to name. Betrayal. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, knowing I couldn't ignore this anymore. Back in my apartment, the silence was deafening, the kind that presses against your ears. I hadn't slept since Mom's so-called family meeting, my mind replaying Harold's smug grin, Sheila's nervous fidgeting, and Mom's cold hand on mine. I'm Clara, 29, and I felt like I was drowning in questions with no answers. I paced the living room, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, trying to piece together what just happened. Those lawyers, Mom's new necklace, Nathan's absence, it all felt like a setup, but I needed proof. I grabbed my phone and called Walter, Dad's old friend who'd helped with the estate. He answered on the first ring, his voice gruff but warm like always. "Clara, you okay?" I wasn't, but I didn't say that. I told him about the meeting, the lawyer's Mom's push for adjustments. There was a long pause. Then he sighed, heavy and tired. "She hired those suits months ago," he said, "before your dad even passed." My breath caught like someone had punched me in the gut. Months ago, I sank onto the couch, my legs giving out. Walter explained that Dad's will was crystal clear. The house and savings went to me, a small sum to Nathan, and nothing for Mom. It was deliberate, he said, because of her history with money. I gripped the phone, my nails digging into my palm. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice shaking. Walter hesitated, then said he thought Mom had backed off after Dad's death. I wanted to scream, but I just thanked him and hung up, my head spinning. Months ago. She'd been planning this while Dad was still breathing, while I was holding his hand in the hospital. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, like a knife twisting in my chest. I stood and walked to the kitchen, needing to move to do something. I filled a glass with water, but my hands were trembling so bad I spilled half of it on the counter. I opened my laptop, desperate for answers. My email inbox was a mess, but I scrolled through looking for anything from Mom or Nathan. That's when I saw it, an email from Mom sent to Nathan, but forwarded to me by mistake. The subject was blank, but the message wasn't. "Nathan, we need to stick to the plan," it read. "Clara won't understand, but this is for our future. Convince her it's right." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it. Our future, convince me. I read it again, then a third time, each word sinking in like poison. Mom wasn't just after the inheritance, she was pulling Nathan into it, turning my own brother against me. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short, angry bursts. I grabbed my phone and called Nathan, not caring that it was late. He picked up, his voice groggy. "Clara, it's midnight. What's wrong?" I didn't ease into it. I told him about the email, my voice sharp, cutting through his excuses. "Why are you helping her?" I demanded. There was a long silence. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with guilt. "She said you'd waste it, Clara," he muttered. "That you're not stable enough with your freelance gigs and all." I felt like I'd been slapped. Waste it, me. The one who'd scrimped and saved while Mom blew through money on failed ventures after the divorce. Nathan tried to backtrack, saying Mom made it sound like a family decision, but I wasn't hearing it. "You knew," I said, my voice breaking. "You knew and you didn't tell me." He started to apologize, but I hung up, my hands shaking so bad I dropped the phone. I leaned against the counter, tears burning my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Nathan, my big brother, the one who'd taught me to ride a bike, was part of this. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me, like every piece of my family was slipping away. I went to my bedroom, the air stuffy despite the open window. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a framed photo of Dad and me from my high school graduation. He was beaming his arm around me, proud in a way Mom never was. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the glass. Walter's words echoed in my head. Dad's will was deliberate. I needed to see it for myself to know exactly what he'd intended. I texted Walter asking if he had a copy of the will or any proof of Mom's plans. He replied almost instantly, saying he'd meet me tomorrow with something Dad left behind. I set the phone down my chest tight, knowing whatever he showed me would change everything. The next morning I met Walter at a coffee shop downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and the smell of burnt espresso. My eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, my body heavy, but I forced myself to sit up straight as he slid into the booth across from me. Walter's face was lined, his hands steady as he pulled a folded envelope from his jacket. "This is from your dad," he said, his voice low. I took it, my fingers brushing the worn paper, and saw Dad's handwriting on the front. Clara. My throat tightened, but I didn't open it yet. I couldn't not hear. Walter leaned forward, his coffee untouched. "Your mom's been trouble with money for years," he said. "Your dad knew it, wrote her out to protect you. He told me she'd racked up debts, bad ones, after the divorce. Gambled away savings, took loans she couldn't pay." I stared at him, the hum of the shop fading. I'd known Mom was reckless, but it was worse than I imagined. Walter said Dad had warned him she might try something after he was gone. I clutched the envelope, my nails digging into the edges, feeling like I was holding a bomb. I left the shop in a daze, the envelope tucked into my purse. I drove to a park near my apartment, needing air, needing space. The sky was gray, the benches slick from last night's rain. I sat under an oak tree, its branches creaking in the wind, and finally opened the letter. Dad's words were careful, deliberate, written in the shaky script of his final months. "Clara, if you're reading this, I'm gone and your mom's likely after what I left you. I'm sorry. I kept her out of the will because she'd burn through it, leave you with nothing. You're my heart, my legacy. Don't let her take it." I pressed the letter to my chest, my breath hitching. He'd seen this coming and I hadn't. I walked the park's loop, the gravel crunching under my sneakers, trying to process it all. Mom's debts, her planning, Nathan's betrayal. It was too much. I stopped by a pond, watching ripples spread from a tossed pebble. That's when my phone chimed. A text from Mom, short and pointed. "We need to talk, Clara. Come by today." My stomach twisted. I didn't want to go, but I needed to know how far she'd push this. I typed a quick reply saying I'd be there in an hour, then shoved the phone in my pocket, my hands clenching into fists. At her house, the air felt different, heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring a mug of tea, her movements slow, deliberate. No lawyers this time. Just her, but that didn't ease the knot in my chest. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a stool. I stayed standing, my arms crossed. "What's this about?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. She sighed, setting the spoon down, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You're misunderstanding everything, Clara," she said. "Your dad's will, it's not fair. We should share it as a family." I laughed, sharp and bitter, surprising myself. "Share? You mean take?" Her eyes narrowed, but she kept her tone soft, like she was soothing a child. "You're not ready for that kind of money," she said. "You're freelancing, it's unstable. I'm just trying to help you." Her words stung, slicing into every doubt I'd ever had about my career, my choices. I stepped closer, my voice low. "Don't pretend this is about me. I know about your debts, your plans." Her face didn't change, but her hand froze on the mug, a crack in her calm. Then I heard it, a muffled voice from the living room, low and urgent. I turned, catching a glimpse of a man's shadow through the doorway. Mom followed my gaze, her expression tightening. "That's just Gregory," she said quickly. "My friend. He's helping me sort this out." I stared at her, my pulse racing. Friend? I'd never heard of a Gregory, but the way she said his name, the way her eyes darted, told me he was more than that. I walked toward the living room, ignoring her protests, and saw a man on the phone, his back to me. "Big payout." Soon he was saying, his voice smug. I froze, my blood running cold. I turned back to Mom, my voice barely a whisper. "Who is he really?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, her composure slipping. "Clara, you're overreacting," she said, but it sounded hollow. I didn't wait for more. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, my heart pounding. As I stepped outside, I glanced back and saw her standing in the kitchen, her face pale, Gregory's shadow looming behind her. I got in my car, my hands shaking, and drove off, the weight of her lies crushing me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about who she'd become. Days after leaving Mom's house, her lies and Gregory's voice haunted me. I'm Clara, 29, and I was barely holding it together. My apartment felt like a cage, every corner filled with questions I couldn't answer. Then Mom called, her voice clipped, insisting I come to a final estate meeting at a law office downtown. It's to settle everything, she said, but her tone was cold, like she was reading a script. I agreed, not because I trusted her, but because I needed to face this head-on. The office was on the 5th floor of a glass building, all sleek lines and polished floors. I stepped off the elevator, my stomach churning, and walked into a conference room that smelled of leather and coffee. Mom was there, sitting at a long table, her posture rigid, her blouse pressed to perfection. Harold, the slick lawyer, sat beside her, his smile as oily as ever. Sheila, the quieter one, was on his left, her eyes darting to the floor. Gregory was there too, slouched in a corner chair, his suit wrinkled his presence like a stain in the room. No Nathan again. I clenched my jaw, feeling the weight of being alone. I took a seat, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the cool metal of Dad's old keychain in my pocket grounding me. I'd carried it since I was a kid, a gift I'd given him, now a reminder of his strength. Harold cleared his throat, sliding a thick stack of papers across the table. We've identified debts tied to your father's estate, he said, his voice smooth, practiced. To settle them, you'll need to sign over the house. My heart stopped. Debts. Dad was meticulous, paid every bill on time. I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the panic rising. What debts? Show me the proof. Harold's smile didn't waver, but his eyes flicked to Mom, a silent signal. It's complicated, dear, he said, his condescension dripping. We've handled the details. Just sign and we'll take care of it. I looked at Mom, expecting her to speak, to explain, but she was staring at her hands, her fingers twisting a ring I didn't recognize. Gregory shifted his chair, creaking, and I caught a smirk on his face, quick but unmistakable. My skin crawled. This wasn't about debts. This was theft dressed up in legal jargon. I turned to Sheila, who'd been silent, her pen gripped so tightly her knuckles were white. Do you agree with this? I asked, my voice sharp. She flinched, her eyes meeting mine for a split second before dropping again. Harold cut in, his tone patronizing. Sheila's on board, Clara. We're all here for your best interest. But Sheila's face told a different story, her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands trembling. I wanted to push, to demand she speak, but Mom spoke first, her voice soft, almost pleading. Clara. I'm protecting you, she said, her eyes welling with tears. You don't need this burden. The tears were new and they hit me like a slap. I'd seen Mom cry before, but never like this, never so calculated. I stood my chair, scraping loudly, and pointed at the papers. I'm not signing anything, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Show me the debts, or this ends now. Harold's smile faltered just for a moment, and Gregory let out a low chuckle like he was enjoying the show. Mom's tears stopped as quickly as they'd started, her face hardening. Clara, don't make this harder than it needs to be, she said, her voice low, almost a threat. I looked around the room at Mom's cold stare, Harold's fake calm, Gregory's arrogance, Sheila's unease. My chest tightened like I was suffocating. Everything Dad had worked for, everything he'd wanted for me, was slipping through my fingers. I gripped the keychain in my pocket, its edges biting into my palm, and felt a surge of anger, raw and unstoppable. This wasn't just about money. It was about Dad's trust, his love, and they were trying to rip it away. I opened my mouth to speak, my heart pounding, ready to tear into them, when the door behind me creaked open. I spun around, expecting Nathan, hoping for backup, but it was just a receptionist poking her head in, murmuring about a scheduling mix-up. She left as quickly as she came, the door clicking shut, leaving me alone again with Mom, Harold, Sheila, and Gregory. My words were still lodged in my throat, the air thick with tension. I'm Clara, 29, and in that moment I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. Harold recovered first, his voice cutting through the silence. Clara. Let's not be dramatic, he said. leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "These debts are real, and signing is your only way out." He pushed the papers closer, the pages fanning out like a taunt. I stared at them, my vision blurring the words swimming on the page. Mom stood, her heels clicking as she moved to my side, her hand hovering near my shoulder but not touching. "Clara, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "You're making a scene. Just trust me." Trust her. The words snapped something inside me. I turned to face her, my eyes burning. "Trust you," I said, my voice low, trembling with rage. "You've been lying to me, planning this before Dad was even gone." Mom's face paled, her lips parting, but no words came. Gregory snorted from his corner, muttering something under his breath, and I caught the word ungrateful. It was like gasoline on a fire. I rounded on him, my hands clenched. "What did you say?" I demanded, my voice rising. He met my gaze, his eyes cold, and said, "You're just a spoiled kid who doesn't deserve it." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. Spoiled? I'd spent years scraping by, taking freelance jobs, eating ramen to save for rent, while Mom and this stranger schemed to take what Dad had left me. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to defend me, to say something, but she just stood there, her eyes flicking to Gregory, then back to me. Her silence was louder than any words. Sheila shifted her chair, creaking, and I caught her wiping her palms on her skirt, her face flushed. Harold cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Let's stay focused," he said, but I wasn't listening. I stepped closer to Mom, my voice breaking. "You knew Dad wanted this for me," I said, each word a struggle. "You were there when he told me, when he said it was my future. How could you do this?" Her eyes glistened. But it wasn't remorse. It was defiance. She straightened, her voice sharp. "Your father was wrong, Clara," she said. "He always favored you, left me with nothing. I deserve this too." The admission hit like a slap, raw and unfiltered. She wasn't just greedy, she resented me, resented Dad's love for me. I stumbled back, my legs unsteady, my breath shallow. The room spun, Harold's voice droning in the background, something about legal obligations. But it was white noise. Gregory stood, his presence looming, and said, "Sign the damn papers, Clara, or we'll drag this out until you're broke." His threat was a blade cutting through what little composure I had left. I looked at Sheila, desperate for an ally, but she was staring at her hands, her silence deafening. Mom's words echoed in my head. "Deserve this too." Mixing with Gregory's venom, Harold's smugness, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. I sank into my chair, my hands covering my face, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. I was alone, surrounded by people who'd twisted Dad's legacy into a weapon. My chest ached, not just for the house or the money, but for the family I thought I had. Mom's resentment, Gregory's cruelty, Nathan's absence, it was all too much. I felt hollow, like every piece of me had been carved out, leaving nothing but pain and a suffocating sense of loss. I left that law office with my heart in pieces, Mom's words and Gregory's threats ringing in my ears. I'm Clara, 29, and I drove home through Portland's gray streets, my hands shaking on the wheel. My apartment was dark when I got back, the silence heavy, but I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor, my back against the couch, and let the pain wash over me. But something else was stirring too, a spark small but stubborn, refusing to let them win. The next morning I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I couldn't let Mom and her cronies steal Dad's legacy. I needed help, someone who knew the law better than Harold. I opened my laptop and searched for attorneys, my fingers hesitant but determined. After an hour, I found Allison, a local lawyer with sharp reviews and a no-nonsense vibe. I called her office, my voice steady as I booked a consultation. It was a small step, but it felt like reclaiming ground. Allison's office was a cozy space downtown, cluttered with books and framed diplomas. She was in her 40s with a direct gaze and a handshake that meant business. I told her everything: Mom's meeting the lawyers, Gregory's payout comment, Dad's letter. She listened, taking notes, her pen moving fast. When I finished, she leaned back, her expression calm but focused. Your mom's banking on intimidation, she said. But if your dad's will is clear, her claims won't hold. We need evidence to shut this down. Evidence. The word lit a fire in me. I went home and dug through every document I had, Dad's will, bank statements, even old emails. I called Walter again, asking for anything he had on Mom's financial history. He promised to send a file including a statement from Sheila, who'd quit Harold's firm after the meeting. I felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by exhaustion. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was personal, every step a reminder of Mom's betrayal. I needed Nathan on my side, but I dreaded facing him after his silence. I drove to a diner halfway to Seattle, a neutral spot, and texted him to meet me. He showed up late, his shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding mine. I didn't waste time. I need you to tell the truth, I said, my voice low but firm. About Mom, the email, everything. He stared at his coffee, his fingers tapping the mug. I was wrong, Clara, he mumbled. She made it sound like you couldn't handle it. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. Then help me fix this, I said. Testify with me. Nathan hesitated, his jaw tight, but then he nodded a small, reluctant agreement. It wasn't a full victory, but it was enough for now. I left the diner, the cool air hitting my face, and felt a shift inside me. I wasn't the scared girl from that law office anymore. I was fighting for Dad, for myself, and I wasn't alone. As I drove back, Allison's words echoed, "Shut this down." I gripped the wheel, my resolve hardening, ready to take on whatever came next. Back in Portland, I felt a fire I hadn't known was there. I'm Clara, 29, and I was done being the victim of Mom's schemes. Allison had set up a mediation meeting at a neutral office, a chance to confront Mom and Harold with our evidence. I spent the night before in my apartment sorting through papers Walter sent. Among them was a bank statement in Mom's name, linked to Gregory, showing transfers to an account I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I traced the numbers, proof of her desperation, her debt driving this whole mess. The mediation office was plain, with beige walls and a conference table that smelled faintly of polish. I arrived early. Allison by my side, her briefcase stuffed with our case. Nathan was there, fidgeting in a chair, his face pale but resolute. Walter sat quietly, his presence steadying me. Mom walked in, her posture stiff, Harold trailing her like a shadow. No Gregory this time, which made the air feel lighter but no less tense. Mom's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something, guilt maybe, but it vanished fast. Allison started, her voice calm but cutting. "We have evidence your claims are fraudulent," she said, sliding copies of Dad's will and Sheila's statement across the table. "Mom's debts, the forged documents, it's all here." I watched Mom's face, waiting for a crack, but she just crossed her arms, her lips tight. Harold scoffed, adjusting his tie. "This is speculative," he said, but his confidence was thinner now, his eyes darting to the papers. I took a breath and spoke, my voice steady. "You lied about Dad's wishes," I said, looking at Mom. "You planned this with Gregory, used Nathan, and tried to bully me. It's over." Mom flinched, her hands clenching, but she didn't look away. "I'm protecting our family, Clara," she said, her voice sharp, almost convincing. "You're twisting everything." I shook my head, the weight of her denial heavy but not surprising. Nathan spoke up, his voice low, shaky. "I was wrong, Mom," he said. "You made me think Clara couldn't handle it, but you were just after the money." The room went still, his words like a slap. Mom's eyes widened, her breath catching, and I saw her facade crack just for a second. Allison leaned forward, her tone icy. "Drop your claim or we'll take this to court," she said. "You'll lose and it'll cost you more than legal fees." Harold shifted, his face flushed, and muttered something about reviewing the evidence. Mom stood her chair, scraping, and pointed at me, her voice rising. "You're selfish, Clara, just like your father." I froze, the accusation stinging, but I didn't flinch. I stood too, meeting her gaze. "I'm honoring Dad," I said quietly. "You're the one breaking us." She stormed out, leaving her scarf on the table, a small forgotten piece of her. Harold followed, his bravado gone, muttering about a settlement. I sat back down, my hands trembling, but not from fear, from power. Allison touched my arm, nodding slightly, her eyes proud. Nathan looked at me, his expression heavy with regret, but also relief. Walter smiled, a quiet anchor in the chaos. I picked up Mom's scarf, its silk soft against my fingers, and set it aside, a symbol of what she'd tried to take. I walked out of that room, the hallway bright with afternoon light. My chest was tight, not with pain now, but with a quiet strength I'd built from the ashes of her betrayal. I stopped at the window, looking out at the city below, and folded my hands in my pockets. No words, no tears, just a steady breath and the weight of my choice to fight. I was ready for whatever came next. Walking out of that mediation office, I felt the weight of my own strength, a quiet power I'd never known. I'm Clara, 29, and the world seemed sharper, the Portland skyline crisp against a pale sky. Days later, the court's ruling came through a simple email from Allison that changed everything. Dad's will stood firm, the house, the savings, they were mine. Mom's claims were dismissed, her forged documents exposed. She was ordered to cover legal fees, a blow to her already strained finances. I read the email twice, my hands steady, waiting for relief to flood me. It didn't, not fully. I moved into Dad's house the next week, a modest 2-story with creaky floors and windows that rattled in the wind. Unpacking was slow, each box a piece of him, his flannel shirts, his carpentry books, a chipped mug he'd used every morning. I set the mug on the kitchen counter, its handle worn smooth, and felt a pang, not just for him, but for what I'd lost with Mom. The victory was mine, but it tasted bittersweet, like coffee gone cold. Nathan came by his truck, pulling up at dusk, the gravel crunching under his tires. He stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. I let him in, the air between us heavy but not hostile. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, his voice rough like he'd rehearsed it. "I should have stood by you from the start." I nodded, pouring him coffee, the mug's warmth grounding me. We sat at the table, the silence stretching, but it wasn't empty, it was healing. He promised to visit more, to rebuild what we'd nearly lost. I believed him, or at least I wanted to. Allison called later, her voice brisk but warm. "Your mom's boyfriend's gone," she said. "Gregory split after the ruling left her high and dry." I pictured Mom alone in her too-perfect house, her new jewelry, pawned, her plans unraveled. Part of me wanted to feel satisfied, but instead I felt a hollow ache. She'd chosen this path, but she was still my mother, and that truth sat like a stone in my chest. I thanked Allison and hung up, staring out the window at the darkening yard, the shadows long and still. I wandered upstairs, my footsteps echoing, and found a box I hadn't opened yet. Inside was a leather-bound journal, Dad's handwriting filling the pages. I sat on the floor, the wood cool beneath me, and read his words written years before his illness. "Clara's my pride," he'd written, "but Patricia's greed worries me. She'll try to take what's hers." My eyes stung, not with tears, but with the weight of his foresight. He'd known, and he'd trusted me to fight. I closed the journal, my fingers lingering on the cover, and felt the silence of the house settle around me, heavy with what I'd won and what I'd lost. I stood in Dad's house, the journal still in my hands, its weight anchoring me. I'm Clara, 29, and the silence of the place felt like a mirror reflecting every choice I'd made. A few days later, Mom texted asking to meet at a cafe across town. Her message was short, no warmth, just a time and place. I stared at it, my thumb hovering, unsure if I could face her. But I needed to know where she stood, so I agreed, my resolve brittle but firm. The cafe was crowded, the clatter of dishes and voices filling the air. Mom sat in a corner booth, her hair looser than usual, her face bare of makeup. She looked older, her eyes shadowed like the fight had drained her. I slid into the seat across from her, the vinyl squeaking, and waited. She didn't meet my gaze at first, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I messed up, Clara," she said finally, her voice low, almost swallowed by the noise. "Gregory pushed me, said we'd be set for life." I believed him. Her admission landed softly, but it cut deep. I leaned back, my hands flat on the table, studying her. No tears this time, no performance. Just a woman who'd gambled and lost. "Why didn't you stop?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment I saw the mom who'd braided my hair as a kid. "I was desperate," she said. "Debts piled up, and I thought I could fix it. For us." I shook my head, the word us stinging. There was no us in her plan. I told her I'd help with her debts, but only if she got counseling, faced what she'd done. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded a small, reluctant agreement. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't reply, just sipped my coffee, its bitterness sharp. I noticed a small gesture. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a drawing I'd made at 6, a crayon sketch of our family, all smiles. She'd kept it. My throat tightened, but I didn't reach for it. I left the cafe, the drawing in my pocket, its edges worn. Driving home, I felt lighter but not free. Mom's remorse was real, and it didn't erase the hurt, the years of distance, the scheming. I stopped at a light, the city blurring through the windshield, and thought of Nathan, who was waiting at the house to plan Dad's memorial. We'd reclaim his memory, build something new. But as I parked, the drawing's weight in my pocket felt like a tether to her, to a past I couldn't fully let go. I stepped inside, the quiet of the house swallowing me, and stood still, my breath shallow, carrying her regret and my resolve in equal measure. I'm Clara, 29, and Dad's house was starting to feel like mine. The mornings were quiet, sunlight filtering through the curtains, casting soft patterns on the living room walls. I'd been here a month, and the space was changing, new paint, my books on the shelves. But I kept Dad's old armchair by the window, its faded plaid a reminder of him. I sat there with my coffee, the steam curling up, and felt a stillness I hadn't known in months. The fight with Mom was over, but its echoes lingered softer now. I decided to make the house my own, not just Dad's anymore. I spent a weekend sanding down an old dining table, the wood smooth under my hands, the work grounding me. I hung a few of my own sketches, simple line drawings from my freelance days, on the walls. Each nail I hammered felt like a step forward, a way to claim this space. Nathan came by one afternoon, his toolbox in hand, offering to help repaint the living room. We worked side by side, rollers gliding over the walls, turning them a soft blue. We didn't talk much, but the quiet was comfortable, like we were stitching something back together. One evening, I met Audrey, my neighbor, while watering the front lawn. She was older, her hair silver, her smile warm as she leaned over the fence. She'd known Dad for years, used to bring him casseroles when he was sick. "Your dad was proud of you," she said, her eyes crinkling. "He'd talk about your art, your grit." I smiled, my throat tight, and invited her in for tea. We sat in the kitchen, the kettle humming, and she shared stories of Dad fixing her porch, always with a joke. It felt like finding a piece of him I'd lost. I called Walter the next day, wanting to thank him for everything, his evidence, his support, his faith in me. We met at his workshop, the air thick with the scent of pine and varnish. He hugged me, his flannel shirt rough against my cheek, and said Dad would have been proud. We talked about a community event, a way to honor Dad's memory, maybe a bench in the park with his name. I nodded, the idea settling in me like a seed, something good to grow from all this pain. Before leaving, I walked to the backyard where the grass was patchy but green. I'd found a small sapling at a nursery, a maple Dad always wanted to plant but never did. I dug a hole, the earth cool and heavy, and set the tree's roots in, patting the soil down with care. I stood back, my hands dirty, and looked at the tiny tree, its leaves catching the light. It was small, and it was a start, a quiet promise to Dad, to myself. I breathed deeply, the air clean, and felt the world slow just for a moment. The maple sapling stood firm in the backyard, its leaves trembling in the breeze. I'm Clara, 29, and I was finding my footing in Dad's house, my house now. I'd started a small graphic design business, working from a corner desk by the window, the light soft on my sketches. My first big client, a local bookstore, wanted a logo, and I poured myself into it, each line a piece of me taking root. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd sit at my desk, the hum of my laptop steady, and feel Dad's pride like he was watching. Audrey invited me to her book club, a small group that met at her house, their voices warm over cups of tea. I went hesitant at first, but their laughter and stories pulled me in. We read novels about loss and rebuilding, and I found myself speaking up, sharing bits of my journey, my words careful but honest. They listened, their nods gentle, and for the first time in months, I felt part of something bigger than my pain. Nathan and I planned Dad's memorial, a simple gathering at the park. We set up tables under the oak string lights glowing as dusk fell. Townsfolk came, their faces familiar from Dad's stories, each bringing a memory. A man named Ray, who'd worked with Dad years ago, handed me a small chisel, its handle worn. "Your dad lent me this," he said, his voice thick. "Forgot to give it back." I took it, my fingers closing around the wood, and smiled, my chest tight with gratitude. It was another piece of Dad returned to me. A letter came from Mom that week, her handwriting neat on plain paper. She was in counseling, she wrote, working a steady job at a library, respecting my boundaries. I read it standing in the kitchen, the fridge humming softly, and felt a quiet shift. I didn't reply, not yet, but I tucked the letter into a drawer, a small act of keeping the door ajar just a crack. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I wasn't closing her out either. I walked to the park one evening, the air cool, the sky streaked with pink. I sat on a bench, the one we'd dedicate to Dad soon, and watched kids play in the distance, their laughter faint. My hands rested in my lap, the chisel in my pocket, a quiet weight. I thought of Mom, Nathan, the fight, and how I'd carried it all. But here in this moment, I let it settle like dust after a storm. I breathed out slow and steady, the world soft around me, and felt a peace I hadn't known I could claim. A year had passed since the courtroom, and I was finding my rhythm. I'm Clara, 30 now, sitting in Dad's old armchair, the morning light soft through the window. My house felt alive, filled with small touches of me. A woven rug, a shelf of art books, the faint scent of lavender from a candle I'd lit. My design business was growing steady enough that I'd hired Zoe, a young artist with a quick laugh and sharp ideas. She worked beside me, her sketches pinned to the wall, and I felt a quiet pride, like I was building something Dad would smile at. I'd started a routine, waking early to sketch before the day began. The pencil's scratch on paper was soothing, each line a step away from the chaos of last year. I'd take breaks to walk the neighborhood, passing kids on bikes, the air crisp with fall. One morning I stopped by the mailbox and found a postcard from Nathan, a photo of Seattle's skyline. He wrote about visiting soon, maybe for good, and I smiled, folding it carefully, our bond stronger now, rebuilt on trust. Zoe and I worked late one evening, finalizing a poster for a local festival. She asked about my story, curious about the house, my drive. I shared a little, not the pain, but the growth, how I'd learned to stand firm. Her eyes lit up and she said I'd inspired her to keep going despite her own doubts. I paused, her words sinking in, and realized I was becoming someone who could lift others, not just carry my own weight. I drove to the cemetery that weekend, the gravel path familiar under my tires. Dad's grave was simple, a stone with his name, the grass neat around it. I knelt, brushing leaves away, and spoke softly, telling him about the business, the memorial bench we'd dedicated, the life I was making. I didn't cry, but my voice was steady, full of gratitude. I stood, the wind cool on my face, and felt him with me, not in the stone, but in the strength I'd found. Back home, I sat at my desk, the house quiet, except for the tick of a clock. I pulled out a notebook, not for sketching, but for words, and started writing a letter to myself. It wasn't long, just a promise to keep going, to honor Dad by living fully. I sealed it, tucking it into a drawer, and leaned back, the room bathed in soft light. My breath was slow, steady, the weight of the past easing, leaving space for what came next. The letter to myself sat in the drawer, a quiet vow I'd revisit when doubt crept in. I'm Clara, 30, and life had settled into a rhythm that felt like mine. One afternoon, I agreed to meet Mom at a small diner, a neutral place with checkered tablecloths and the hum of conversation. She was already there, her hands folded, her face softer than I'd ever seen. No jewelry, no pretense, just a plain sweater and a nervous smile. I sat across from her, the smell of fries lingering, and waited. She spoke first, her voice low, steady. "I'm trying, Clara," she said. "The counseling, the job. It's slow, but I'm learning. I hurt you, and I'll carry that." Her eyes met mine. No deflection, no excuses. I nodded my fingers, tracing the edge of the table, feeling the years of distance between us. "I forgive you," I said the words, heavy but true. "But I need space to keep this peace." She nodded, her lips trembling, and we sat in silence, the weight of our history shared, but not erased. I left the diner, the evening air cool, and drove home, the city lights blurring past. Forgiveness wasn't a gift to her. It was for me a way to let go without letting her back in fully. I'd learned that family could break you, but it didn't define you. My worth wasn't in Mom's choices or Dad's legacy. It was in the life I was building piece by piece with my own hands. I thought of Zoe, my clients, the community that showed up for Dad's memorial. They were my anchor now, not the pain I'd carried. That night I stood in my backyard, the maple sapling taller now, its branches sturdy. I'd framed that old crayon drawing from Mom, not as a bridge to her, but as a reminder of who I'd been, a kid who loved fiercely, who still could. I hung it in my studio, its colors faded and honest, a piece of my past I'd made peace with. I'd chosen who to trust, who to let close, and that choice was my strength, my freedom. What's the hardest truth you've had to face to find your own strength? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, or share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to healing, to finding our way, one step at a time.